All right, let's jump right in. Today we're looking at a chapter from Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise.
Okay.
This chapter lays out a vision for the Department of Commerce in 2025. And it's a pretty dense document, so we're going to try to break it down for you.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to unpack.
It is. So first things first, this chapter is coming from a conservative perspective, right?
Yeah, definitely. So they've got some pretty specific ideas about how they think the Department of Commerce should operate.
Right. And just to be clear, we're not here to endorse or critique those ideas. Our goal is to just present them to you objectively.
Exactly. Let the listener make up their own mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the Department of Commerce is kind of a weird one, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd duck. It's responsible for so many different things.
It really is. Everything from economic growth to patents to the weather.
Yeah, I mean, some people think it's absolutely essential for, American success,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
while others think it's just a big bureaucratic mess.
It's like that one drawer in the kitchen,
Oh.
the junk drawer.
The one where you just shove everything in.
Exactly. And this chapter is kind of trying to figure out how to harness the power of the Department of Commerce while also making it less of a junk drawer.
Right. So how do you streamline it? How do you make it more efficient?
Yeah, make it
Right.
more effective.
Oh?
So what are some of the big changes they're proposing?
Well, one of their main arguments is that the department has become a bit of a dumping ground over the years
Oh,
for programs that don't really fit neatly anywhere else.
So it's just kind of grown organically and become
Yeah.
this kind of sprawling entity with all these.
Exactly. A lot of overlap, a lot of redundancy.
Okay, so less junk drawer,
Yeah.
more streamlined, more focused.
It's more strategic.
Right. So how do they actually propose to do that?
Well, one of the things they suggest is consolidating certain agencies and moving some functions around.
Oh.
So, for example, they want to move parts of the International Trade Administration over to the U.S. Trade Representative.
Okay, and why is that?
Well, they argue that this would kind of centralize trade policy and reduce redundancies. You'd have all the trade experts under one roof.
Okay, so more efficient decision making.
Oh, hopefully.
Yeah.
They also propose merging a bunch of these statistical agencies.
Like the Census Bureau?
Yeah, like the Census Bureau, the Bureau of Economic Analysis into a single entity.
So basically just create this one mega
Yeah, a data powerhouse.
data powerhouse.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And what's the rationale behind that?
Well, they say it would reduce costs, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
Improve data collection, and, maybe even improve the quality of the data.
Okay, so less duplication, more consistency.
Exactly.
All right, so we've got streamlining the bureaucracy is a big theme here.
Mm.
What else?
Another major focus is confronting China.
Okay, this is where things start to get a little bit
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting.
a little bit tense.
A little spicy.
They really see China as a major threat, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They frame it as a major economic and technological threat.
And they use some pretty strong language too.
They do. It's not just competition. It's like an economic war.
Right. It's very assertive.
Yeah. They call for aggressive trade enforcement to protect American businesses and intellectual property.
And they're not just talking about playing defense. They want to go on the offensive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They want to limit technology transfer to China. They want to secure critical supply chains, make sure America's in a strong position.
So it's a very proactive
It's
stance.
very proactive.
Okay, so streamlining, confronting China. Anything else we should flag for our listeners before we dive into the specifics?
Yeah, actually, there's a couple more things. One is NOAA,
NOAA?
National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Right, the weather folks.
The weather folks, exactly. And they have some pretty strong opinions about NOAA.
It sounds like they think NOAA has gone a little bit off the
A
rails.
little bit off the rails,
Yeah.
yeah. They portray it as this bloated bureaucracy that's been hijacked by climate alarmists.
Oh, wow.
So they propose some pretty radical changes like commercializing weather forecasting. Yeah, transferring some of its survey functions to other agencies and downsizing climate change research.
So shrinking NOAA's role in climate science.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, so that's definitely going to be controversial.
Oh, yeah. For
All right, and then the last thing.
The last big one is the Census Bureau.
Ah, the census.
They're really focused on the 2030 census, and they have some very specific ideas about how it should be conducted.
Like what?
Well, they want to add a citizenship question.
Oh, boy, that's a hot button issue.
It is. They also want to scrutinize changes to race and ethnicity questions.
Okay.
And they even recommend abolishing the Census Bureau's National Advisory Committee.
Why is that?
They claim it's biased towards liberal viewpoints.
So they're really trying to inject a conservative perspective into every aspect of the department,
It seems that way.
from trade to data to scientific research.
Every nook and cranny.
All right, well, this is just a taste of what's to come.
Mm.
We're going to dive into the specifics of their recommendations in the next part of our deep dive.
Buckle up.
So stay tuned.
Okay, so let's dig back into this conservative vision for the Department of Commerce.
All right, so last time we talked about their main goals,
Yeah.
right? Streamlining the department, taking a hard line on China,
Right, more of a strategic approach.
and kind of injecting a conservative lens into things like NOAA and the census.
Yeah, trying to bring it all in line with their worldview.
Exactly.
Uh.
So now let's get into the nitty-gritty of how they actually propose to do all that.
Okay, so let's start with trade. It's a big one, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely, a core function of the Commerce Department.
Right, and they specifically call for moving some parts of the International Trade Administration over to the U.S. Trade Representative.
The ITA.
Yeah, the ITA. So, for example, they want to shift the Bureau of Industry and Security over to the USTR.
And that's the bureau that oversees export controls, right?
Exactly. And their thinking is that this would create a more unified front when it comes to trade negotiations and enforcement.
So it's all about streamlining and centralizing.
Right. Put all the trade experts under one roof.
Makes sense. So what about those statistical agencies? We talked about merging them into one big data powerhouse.
Yeah, that's right. They want to combine the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Census Bureau, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Wow, that's a lot of agencies.
It is. It would be a massive undertaking.
So what's the main goal there? Efficiency.
Efficiency is a big part of it.
Okay.
They argue that it would eliminate a lot of redundancies,
Sure.
reduce costs, and improve data collection.
And they think it would improve the quality of the data too.
That's their argument.
Yeah.
They say it would lead to more consistent data across the board.
Okay, but couldn't it also make things more complicated?
Oh, absolutely. There are definitely potential downsides to consider. I mean, you're merging three very different agencies.
With their own cultures, their own ways of doing things?
Exactly. So it could create a lot of chaos in the short term.
Right, so it's a gamble for sure.
It is. But they seem to be betting that the long-term benefits will outweigh those risks.
Okay, let's zoom in on the Census Bureau for a second.
Yeah.
They have some pretty controversial recommendations there.
Yeah, they do. This is where their conservative ideology really comes through.
Like what?
Well, for starters, they want to bring back the citizenship question.
The one that was removed from the 2020 census.
That's the one. And they argue that it's crucial to know how many citizens live in the U.S. for things like congressional apportionment and allocating federal funds.
But of course, critics say that including a citizenship question would discourage participation, especially among immigrants.
Right, and that could lead to an undercount.
Which would defeat the whole purpose of the census.
Exactly. It's a very contentious issue.
It is. And they also want to take a closer look at changes to race and ethnicity questions.
Yeah, they're concerned that some of those changes are politically motivated and could skew the data.
So again, it's about ensuring that the data reflects their worldview.
Right. They want to make sure it aligns with their understanding of American society.
Okay, let's move on to NOAA. They really don't pull any punches when it comes to NOAA.
No, they don't. They basically accuse NOAA of being bloated, inefficient, and driven by a climate alarmist agenda.
So they want to shrink it down significantly.
Yeah, they want to downsize it. They suggest commercializing weather forecasting.
Really?
Yeah, and transferring some of its survey functions to other agencies like the U.S. Geological Survey.
So they want to take a lot of its responsibilities away.
Exactly. And they also want to slash funding for climate change research.
Wow. So they're basically saying that NOAA is too focused on climate change.
Yeah, that's their argument. They think it's become a distraction from its core missions.
Like weather forecasting and fisheries management.
Right. They want NOAA to get back to basics.
Okay, so this is a pretty radical vision for NOAA.
Yeah.
And it's bound to be controversial,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's going to upset a lot of people.
especially those who see climate change as a serious threat.
Right. It's a very divisive issue.
It is. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about economic development. Curious to hear what they have to say about that.
Okay, so on the one hand, they advocate for abolishing the Economic Development Administration, or EDA.
The EDA.
Yeah.
Mm.
They argue that its grant programs are duplicative and inefficient.
So less government spending, less intervention in the free market.
Yeah, that's the idea. But when it comes to the Minority Business Development Agency, or MBDA, their stance is a bit more nuanced.
The MBDA. Okay, so they want to get rid of programs that help businesses in general, but they're hesitant to do the same for programs that specifically target minority-owned businesses.
Right. And it's interesting because it kind of highlights the tension between their conservative principles, and the realities of a diverse society.
Yeah, they seem to recognize that there are historical inequities that need to be addressed.
Right,
Hmm.
but they want to make sure that any assistance provided is done within a framework that emphasizes individual initiative and limited government.
So no handouts, just a level playing field.
Exactly, but of course the question is, how do you create a level playing field when those historical inequities still exist?
Right. It's a tough question.
It is, and it's one that they don't really answer.
Okay, let's move on to our last topic, intellectual property, or IP.
All right, so they're big proponents of strong IP protections.
They see it as essential for innovation and economic growth.
Right, and they specifically highlight the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, or USPTO.
The Patent Office.
Yeah, and they also talk about the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do they want to do with these agencies?
Well, they want to streamline the patent application process, make it easier for businesses to protect their inventions,
Okay.
and they want to crack down on patent infringement both domestically and internationally.
So they're really focused on protecting American innovation.
Absolutely. They see it as a key to competing with China.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's a two-pronged approach. Strengthen existing IP protections and invest in the development of new technologies.
Right. They want to make sure America stays ahead of the curve.
All right, so that's a pretty comprehensive overview of their vision for the Department of Commerce. It's ambitious, to say the least.
It is, and it's definitely rooted in a very specific set of conservative principles.
Limited government free markets, individual responsibility.
Right, and a strong national defense.
So it's not just about the Commerce Department. It's about reshaping the role of government in American society.
Exactly. It's a much bigger picture.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this conservative vision for the Department of Commerce.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We really have, from streamlining agencies to that hard line on China.
Right, and rethinking the role of government in economic development.
Yeah, and scientific research, too. It's been a lot.
It has.
So as we wrap up, I guess the big question is, what are the key takeaways here?
Well, I think one thing that really stands out is the emphasis on national security.
Okay.
Even though they're all about limited government and free markets,
Right.
they clearly see the Department of Commerce as a vital tool for protecting American interests on the global stage.
Yeah, it's not just about economic growth. It's about making sure America stays on top.
Exactly.
Oh.
Especially with China breathing down our necks.
Right. And it's interesting how they're willing to use the power of government to achieve those goals.
Yeah, they're not afraid of government intervention when it suits their purposes.
Exactly. And speaking of interesting, I thought their stance on minority business development was pretty nuanced.
Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise.
Like, they're skeptical of government programs in general,
Right.
but they seem to recognize that programs like the MBDA can play a role in leveling the playing field.
Yeah, they acknowledge that there are historical inequities that need to be addressed.
Exactly. But they still want to make sure that any government assistance is aligned with their principles of individual initiative and limited government.
It's a tough balance to strike.
It is. Okay, so let's talk about climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Their views on NOAA and climate research are definitely controversial.
Yeah, they're not pulling any punches there.
No, they're not. So just to recap, they basically think that NOAA is too focused on climate change.
Right.
And they question the scientific consensus on climate change,
They do.
which is a pretty bold move.
It is. It's definitely going to alienate a lot of people.
Yeah, anyone who sees climate change as a serious threat is probably not going to be happy about that.
Right. It's a very divisive issue.
It is. And it raises some tough questions about the role of science in policymaking.
Yeah, like, should we always follow the scientific consensus, even when it's inconvenient or politically unpopular?
That's a tough one. I don't know the answer.
Me neither. It's something we need to think about as a society.
Absolutely. So if you had to sum up this chapter in one sentence, what would you say?
I'd say it's a call to action for conservatives to reclaim the Department of Commerce
Okay.
and use it to advance their vision for American economic and geopolitical dominance.
This is a bold vision, that's for sure.
It is, and it's one that's sure to spark a lot of debate.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. And I hope our listeners found it informative and thought-provoking.
Me too. And remember, this is just one perspective on a very complex issue.
Right. There are many other viewpoints out there.
So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep engaging in the conversation.
Well said. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I was